now we take a look at the Sunday newspapers and the stories that are making headlines in the papers. Joining me now is Business Times columnist Hilary Joffe. And thank you, William, for joining us and remaining with us to take a look at the newspapers. My attention was called to the fat cat MPs saying no to the cuts. Now, Hilary, we know the fat has to be cut somewhere. The perks that the MPs are getting are quite enormous. What do you make of their attitude, first of all, and how do we compel them to adhere to these regulations?
Karima, the context, as you know, is one in which we really are busting the budget. As it is, growth is so slow that we're not going to meet the existing budget deficit target of 4.5% for this year. But on top of that, we've had the big Eskom bailout, with the rating agency saying that the deficit is going to go into the 6%. So clearly cuts are needed, and the Treasury has strongly signalled that departments are going to have to cut ahead of the October budget. Now, in total terms, some of these perks are quite small money. I mean, they're big money to citizens, but in the context of how much the budget needs to be cut down, they're quite small. But the point is, these are the people who are supposed to be, taking the lead. These are our legislators.
Our servant leadership.
Our servant leadership, who are quibbling about, whether they should have this kind of car or a fancier car, I was actually shocked to know that they're entitled to alcohol. Why are we paying for... I mean, I'm very, I like a drink myself, but why do we have to pay for them to drink?
Absolutely.
To eat, maybe, but to drink?
And for their families to travel for free.
That too. Look, there is a certain amount of travel which is the nature of the job because of our different our two capitals. However, I think there's a lot of fat that could be cut, and the important thing is that they need to be giving the lead. And if the pushback is starting here, can you imagine what's going on within government?
Absolutely. William, the Watson case has, of course, dominated the news headlines, conspiracy theories all over the show. Apparently, according to this story and the one in other newspapers, the Watsons believe that this was a hit because of the inconsistencies at the crime scene. There was not a lot of blood, but there was a terrible neck wound. The cell phone of Mr. Watson has been traced to unlikely places. What do you think... this coverage has told us about the Watsons, and do you think we've done enough as journalists to actually get to the bottom of it, or are we feeding the conspiracy theories?
Well, I think some people may have been feeding the conspiracy theories, but obviously at the moment there are a lot of big questions, and then combined with what happens on social media, suddenly you turn a few legitimate questions into a host of conspiracy, and that he definitely was this or he definitely wasn't that. And it's one of the newspapers talks about the family, and as much as this man may well have been a scumbag and a crook or whatever, we do have to consider that there's a family that's grieving, and those things we need to have some level of consideration for in terms of how they deal with those things. But I also think we have seen some media that have said, look, we don't know the answers to these things. So until we do, we'll look and we'll keep asking and we'll keep following up. Until we do, we can't say, and this is what we do know. And that's what I think our media should be making sure that they're doing, is saying, these are the things we do know, these are the things we don't know. And until we know more or less, we would advise, sticking to what we actually do know, because it doesn't help anyone to, roll along with these conspiracy theories.
Hilary, conspiracy theories in South Africa are thick and fast, largely because the ruling party takes them so bloody seriously. And of course, you were at Business Day when Brett Kebble died, and it took years for us to establish that it was in fact an assisted suicide. What do you make of the police investigation so far on this matter? I mean, they've said they're investigating culpable homicide. If there was no one else in the car, why would they be looking at culpable homicide?
Look, there are lots of ways in which a murder can be made to look like an accident, and we know that from the movies and the TV serials. So one hopes that the police are taking this seriously. And I suppose the problem with the conspiracy theories is it's always someone's agenda being pursued when the conspiracy theory is put about. So one's got to be very careful to see whose agenda this is and which side you're coming down on. Nonetheless, even at the time that Brett Keppel died,
Yeah.
in such odd circumstances, there were questions. Now, it took years to get to the truth, which was a very, very strange truth.
Yes.
A very strange truth. It may take a while to get to the truth of this one as well. So one hopes that the police are dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and going for it.
Absolutely. Hilary, I want you to stay with us on the City Press, because this is, of course, of great concern to all of us, but to you in particular, because you've been focusing on the economy and state-owned companies. Tito faces ANC's wrath. Now, I've just interviewed the head of the ANC's Economic Transformation Commission. They are... when I say they, it means he and Mr. Mboweni tomorrow meets the top 6 to discuss this document, among other things. Tell us, what do you think is going to go down in that meeting? What do you make of that story? Is Tito really in as big trouble as the newspapers seem to suggest?
I'm sure what he's going to say is it's a paper. It's not a policy. It's a set of proposals. It's a piece of research. It quantifies what we could achieve if we were to do these things. But Karima, I have a different take on this altogether. I mean, when I saw this thing, my heart sank, actually. Not because I'm not sort of pleased that Treasury is trying to take some leadership of a rather incoherent economic policy, but my concern is, will this make policy even more incoherent?
Yes.
We've got a whole lot of stuff already on the table that hasn't been implemented to boost growth. I mean, we can list the initiatives that haven't happened, and now we have something else. So is this going to be another excuse for a talk shop? So I think that is a big concern. And when I looked superficially at this document, my first response was, haven't I seen this somewhere before? This looks like same old, same old.
Yes.
So what is the point of reopening old conversations? And indeed, I mean, I'm not quite sure where all this hysteria comes from, because indeed, some of it is certainly superficially what's absolutely already on the books.
Yeah.
Lowering barriers to competition, pushing labor-intensive sectors, all of that, it's all there. However, let me say this, and this is why I'm persuaded that this is a worthwhile document, or could be, depending on the conversation. People talk about reforms, but they don't know what they mean. This pins down a particular nuance on what should visa reform mean. Well, that's a bad example. But what should industrial policy mean? And our existing industrial policy is actually quite dysfunctional. We should do it, yes, but we should do it in a different way. And I think that's what, if this document can get the conversation about what we're actually going to implement to a more sophisticated and practical level, that could be useful.
What is interesting, of course, William, just to continue the thread of this document, there is a mismatch, as Hilary said, about what some departments have already decided on in this document. Communications is one of them. There's an interview this morning in the Sunday papers by the Telkom CEO, where he says what the Communications Ministry has signed off on and what Tito Mboweni is saying in his discussion paper are two totally different things. Now, you know how important it is to get coherent communications policy. We are behind the global deadline on our migration from analog to digital. It has enormous implications. Is this just the ANC unable to govern?
Well, I don't know about unable, but I think that they've just had so many factions, and the headless chicken thing just keeps coming to mind. When you look at our policy, there is no policy certainty. We haven't had it in the communications sector for nearly 10 years. We're waiting. The policy that we're operating off was, I think, passed in 2008. I mean, it's so old, I can't even remember when we did it. And they keep kind of restarting that process. There's a new thing, and then it keeps breaking down. Now we've got a new minister, and they've been merged again, and we're hearing there's going to be a new policy. That's on their parliamentary plan, but we've yet to see it. There's going to be a broadcasting bill that was put out, put down, put away. So it's
a bit of a circus.
To know what's going on.
I was quite interested in the Sunday Sun's story. It says Vavi's empire crumbles, and of course it refers to his wife Noluthando, who's had a lot of businesses. It created a lot of animosity at the time that Vavi was expelled from COSATU. Hilary, Vavi has been part of SAFTU. We know that NUMSA bankrolls SAFTU. What implications do you think this has for him and his political career?
I think the rumours have been about for a while, as I recall. No, it does weaken him. And in the context of the broader union movement, I think corruption is quite endemic there, as it is in, I'm afraid, the rest of the country.
Yeah.
And it does weaken an already, a union movement which is really losing ground at quite a rapid rate in membership terms, in having a real seat at the table terms. In fact, the union movement punches way above its weight because of its role in the tripartite alliance. If it were up to membership or its actual constructive views on policy alone, it would be really declining at a very rapid rate.
Absolutely. William, what other stories caught your mind? I was quite intrigued by the Sunday World. It says Gupta bribery cash exposed. Have you seen that story? What does it tell you?
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary, actually, you know, that they've captured these deposit boxes that have got stuffed with Kruger rands and wads of cash.
And foreign currency.
And it just gives you this, again, with the Transnet, that we only really still scratching at the surface of just the level of public, you know, laundering and money theft. It's just extraordinary what's been going on. I mean, it's kind of beyond words, and I guess it's appropriate that it's in one of the, you know, the newspapers that's normally known for their celebrity style and the salacious gossip, that you've got a story like that's on your page too. It's just extraordinary.
And what is extraordinary about that story is that it's public information because it's in court documents. Yep. And so it just shows you that often we dismiss the tabloids, but if you follow the paper trail, you get to the meat of the matter. Now, I'm going to give you guys each, 30 seconds to wrap up. From looking at the newspapers overall, if you want to predict what are going to be the kinds of stories that are going to grow legs this week, Hilary, what would it be?
I think this economic policy discussion is really important. I do really hope that it goes in a constructive direction, because the Treasury's got some really incredibly useful things to say about the kind of policy stuff that's already on the table and how we really need to make it, you know, more viable.
Absolutely.
And we need to bring some urgency to it. So I do hope that it's going to go in some constructive direction and ideally prompt some implementation, which is what we're not actually seeing.
I hope that
15 seconds.
I hope there's more on this cash deposit boxes, but also a lot of our newspapers on the inside pages, a lot of stories talking about the climate crisis.
Yes.
And I think that's going to continue to hover just below the surface.
Absolutely. It will be interesting to hear from our Minister of International Relations as to how the climate crisis was addressed at the recent G7 conference that was held. Well, that is about it for us. Thank you so much for joining us looking at the papers. You've had your fix this week. Take care. We'll see you again next week.